screen and
recording in progress.
Thank you, Josh. I hope you can see my screen here. Thank you for the introduction. As Josh said, I'm an assistant clinical investigator in NIAID, and I'm very honored to give this presentation with my mentor, Dr. Kathy Edwards. Kathy's not only a preeminent vaccinologist, she's also an award-winning mentor and is cherished by all of her mentees for very good reasons, as you are going to see. And we're really excited to have this opportunity to share our reflections on our relationship. We've been really fortunate to have this relationship for the past 9 years since I was the ID fellow at Vanderbilt. And over time, it's changed and it's become a source of immense fulfillment for both of us. And we recently, as Josh said, had a chance to reflect on it, which was also a really great experience, and think about what makes it successful from both of our points of views. And this is in JPIDs if you'd like to read further about it. So first, I'll turn it over to Kathy to talk about what her perspective from the eyes of the mentor.
Thank you. You think I would know how to unmute by this time. Thank you so much for this opportunity and for the opportunity to talk with all of the fellows. And this is an amazing time for you all, and a time of excitement. And certainly I couldn't think of a better job now than being a PEDS ID person. So congratulations. I'm going to spend some time in talking about the responsibilities of the mentor. And I want to go over 3 basic ideas or a series of ideas. The first is that for me to really feel that the mentorship relationship is going to be a productive one, I think it's going to be important for the mentee to show me that they have a commitment to gain knowledge, that they have curiosity, that they really come to the relationship with excitement about new knowledge, that they're really willing to put forth the effort to be an academic researcher, which is an exciting, but it's a pretty labor-intensive endeavor. And certainly being able to show that you're in this to really find out new ideas and that you're willing to work really hard to do this, and that you have a passion to serve patients and to contribute to science. And I don't really think there is any other subspecialty in pediatrics that really takes the whole focus of the whole patient and the orchestration between the patient and the pathogen, the host and the organism. And that passion to understand those relationships and to contribute to an understanding is really important. And when Kalpana first came to Vanderbilt, it was very apparent in our first meeting that she fulfilled all of those important metrics. Secondly, I think it's really important that if you're going to be a mentor, that you are willing to do what is necessary. You're willing to provide the financial support for the fellow. If the fellow wants additional training with an MPH or an MSCI, that you work very hard to provide that funding to do that. That you also provide intellectual and emotional support. So that you are there when issues arise, you are there to answer questions and to provide really what is needed in the early days, but also throughout the entire relationship. I feel very strongly that there must be close communication with weekly regular meetings. And also, I don't want to be the one that is holding back manuscripts, abstracts, or grants. So in general, I like to get comments back to the mentee within 24 to 48 hours of the time that they've sent the things to me. So again, the commitment of the mentor to the mentee. And finally, I think what we, in some ways, mentorship is a bit like parenthood, what we ultimately want is for our children, or our academic children, which is what Dr. Gary Marshall fondly called me a number of decades ago. We want our academic children to go forth and to be productive, to be able to answer the questions, to have a fulfilling academic career. And that's important, that you're not really in competition with your mentee, that it's clear that you have special things they work on, but they have their own area. In addition, we need to help them network, to find jobs and connections, and then also to make sure that the relationship will change and evolve. And now I'm really the learner, and Kalpana is the teacher, and that's really an important as well. Next slide. Now, I want to spend a little time talking about the topic, or the mentor topic, because it's really important for you to have a topic that can be your own, that you can wrap your arms around and really embrace. So when Kalpana came to Vanderbilt to pursue her fellowship, and actually before that she came, we talked about the syndrome of periodic fever, pharyngitis, and aphostomatitis. And this has been a syndrome that's really near and dear to my heart. It was first described by one of our pediatric residents who grew up to be an ID doctor, Gary Marshall. And in many circles, it's called the Marshall syndrome. And as you all know, it is a syndrome of periodic fever, pharyngitis, and aphostomatitis. Decade later, one of our medical students worked on it as well, and got further follow-up. And then 20 years later, Jimmy Carlucci, who is now a ID doctor at IU, worked on it with Veronica Worcester to look at long-term follow-up. It was a fascinating clinical syndrome. It really had a very clear phenotypic characteristics, but what caused it, or what it was associated with in terms of environment, genetics, or pathogen, was not clear at all. So it seemed to me that to choose this topic for a very bright and excited mentee would really be good. It would be timely. It would play to her strengths of excitement about clinical medicine, and it would have a long-term potential. She seemed to show passion and motivation for the topic. And she clearly learned what had been done before, and she began to have a clear path to what she would own with the project, and to be thinking about it in very unique ways from what I had anticipated. Next slide. Now, I want to talk a little bit about successful relationships in mentor-mentee, and I would suggest that you may want to pull this article from Academic Medicine, because it talks about successful relationships. And I want to just go over them briefly. Relationship must be reciprocal. There must be a bi-directional exchange. Every week for the meeting, I'm excited because it will bring me new ideas and new thoughts. But if the meeting didn't bring new ideas or new thoughts, then it wouldn't be so interesting. It wouldn't be interesting for Kalpana if I didn't challenge her ideas or ask her why she thought things, certainly with mutual respect, and both should be treating each other with mutual respect. There should be clear expectations. What is really important here? And you know, basically the understanding was we need to try and find out the pathogenesis of this syndrome, and we're going to do about it in a very organized way. We clicked. We sort of loved pediatric medicine. We loved finding answers to new questions. And so it was a very real personal connection. And also we shared the values of research, clinical work, and also the importance of family and personal life. Next slide. We tried to avoid some of the themes that you can see with failed relationships. We need to communicate with tact. If you're a mentee and your mentor gives you a number of suggestions, it's generally best to listen. And certainly there are some times when you may not want to hear what's being said, but if it's said in a tactful way, it really is a function and a situation to learn. Make sure that there is commitment. Make sure that the mentor has time so that those weekly meetings are not canceled every week for 10 months so that you never meet with them or there is a waning interest. If there are personal differences, those need to be discussed. There must never be competition. There must be a collaboration. And there should not be competing agendas for mentors and mentees. And if you feel that's happening, then you should ask someone on your mentorship committee or someone in the division that would have equal power as your mentor to help you with some of those things. And also, I think it's important that you choose a mentor that has some experience in mentoring. But what we find often is that if you choose a mentor that is not so experienced, you may want to choose another mentor who mentors the mentor, so that indeed there is a long path to making sure that you have and you get what you need. Next slide. Now, I want to talk about present a few quotes because I think these are important at getting at the point. On the left side, there will be some issues that the mentor needs to think about, and on the right, some things for the mentee to think about. The mentor does need to play an important role as a listener, as shown in the box. It's important to listen to what the mentee is saying in terms of their goals and their objectives. You need to help them develop their long-range plan, where they are today, where they are at the end of the fellowship, where they are when they begin their next their faculty position, and 10 years from now, and how that you can give them the adequate support at each of those turning points. Sometimes it's hard when you see someone that's wonderful that you want to keep, like Kalpana, but it's important that you understand that indeed they need to grow, and maybe they need to grow in ways that you would not be able at all to provide for them. And that's really important for a mentor to understand. The mentee needs to listen to the mentor and take them seriously. You don't need to do every single thing they say, but if you're working with someone and you basically ignore their advice, it's not going to be a relationship that is probably mutually fruitful. You also need to be an active participant. As this says here, you don't want to be an undifferentiated blob about what you want. You really need to think before you meet with the mentor and go over what it is, what your ideas are. And then also you need to work with the mentor to introduce you to people and other sources of ideas and funding that may be helpful in the long run. Next slide. So there are some personal characteristics you might look at for in a mentor, but also perhaps in a mentee as well. Your mentor must be enthusiastic, incredibly passionate about the science. The enthusiasm should be infectious and create a wonderful atmosphere in the workplace. The mentor should be focused on equipping people with the skills to be fully functional members of the community. They must be unselfish in giving of their time and their ideas. They must be optimistic when your experiment doesn't work, when all of your fractions that you collected in the fraction collector go on the floor, as happened when I was a mentee. You have to have someone to say, it's okay, it's going to be fine. And then also you need to begin to develop this mentorship for life. And certainly that has been something that has been amazingly helpful and exciting to me as I have seen Kalpana take a project and evolve into a whole different series of exciting questions that only she could answer, and now she teaches me about. Next slide. I want to spend a few moments talking about meetings because this is how you anchor your relationship. These should be regularly scheduled, and as Kalpana will tell you as well, we have been meeting at 7 a.m. on Thursday morning Central Time for 9 years. There is an agenda for each meeting so that I know what the Kalpana is going to tell me. If there are papers that I need to read, I've got to read them, because if I don't, she's going to be ahead of me and I'm not going to know how to answer any of the questions that she has, although clearly she will be ahead of me anyway. We need to go over the deliverables that we promised and we outlined, and we need to make sure that the timelines are agreed upon. Kalpana doesn't want to wait 3 weeks for me to read the grant. So I need to tell her that I will have that available in 1 day, 2 days, at the end of the week. And she also needs to submit drafts and manuscripts in a timely fashion. She needs to submit them before they are due. And certainly we know, and have done this sometimes going back and forth on 8 or 10 versions of an abstract, that does take a few hours. So make sure that you don't send the abstract to the mentor a half an hour before it's due. Because poor planning doesn't constitute an emergency for either the mentor or the mentee. These are really the anchors to keep your relationship and your science moving forward. Next slide. So as I would like to just end, I would like to say that this has been an amazing interaction, and I can't wait to hear what Kalpana has to say as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kathy. So now I'll talk about my perspective from that of the mentee. So I'll talk about how to select a mentor, how, again, to anchor that relationship with the weekly meetings from a mentee point of view, and then how the relationship can change with time. So before I do that, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about how I got to where I am and the role of mentors in getting to that place. So during my pediatrics residency, I had primarily done clinical/public health research in vaccine uptake. So when I was going to start my fellowship, I was looking for someone who could mentor me in vaccine research. And the primary reason I decided to go to Vanderbilt was to work with Kathy. I had heard about what a phenomenal mentor she was. I knew that she did really impactful research, and it was in an area that seemed appealing to me. So I accepted the position there. And as she said, we had met during the interview, and I could feel her genuine care for her mentee and for me, even at that stage. And so I knew that was a place that I had to be. So it was Kathy, as she said, who suggested that I study FAPA syndrome. And I remember when she told me that I should consider studying it, I barely even knew what it was. But I knew that I guess I trusted her instinct, and it's turned out to be a really great project and disease to study for me, because it's opened up so many doors. I remember when I first met her, she gave me folders full of literature on FAPA, like papers and papers from the last 30 years that she had marked and looked at, and guided me to review the literature. And she really had a feeling that there was something interesting about the genetics of the disorder. And so she encouraged me to try to delve into the pathogenesis of it. But as a great mentor, she didn't tell me exactly what to do. She guided me and helped me find the resources and the collaborators in order to do that. But it also gave me the freedom to be independent and think about how I wanted to pursue this project. So at Vanderbilt, I was able to do clinical and translational, and started to do some translational research on FAPA. And I was also fortunate that with Kathy's and a T32's financial support, I was able to get an MSCI, which has provided me a lot of knowledge in terms of how to design clinical studies, and doing some statistical analyses that I carry with me to this day. So while I was at Vanderbilt, there was an ID career fellow career conference at the NIH. And so it was also Kathy's idea. Before I went, because it was at NIH, she encouraged me to meet with Steve Holland, who's a scientific director of NIAID, and also Dr. Dan Kastner, who was a scientific director of NHGRI, which is the Genome Institute. And she emailed both of them, told them about me, and asked if I could meet with them. And both of them said yes. And that was really a turning point for me, because both of them encouraged me to come to NIH to further pursue research on FAPA and to really delve into the biology of it, which was also what Kathy hoped that I would do. Initially, I thought that I would be at NIH for 2 years for a postdoc. It took way longer than that, took 5 years. And so Dr. Kastner was my mentor. So Dan is a sort of the father of the field of autoinflammation and has a robust translational program looking at the genetics and also basic science of autoinflammatory disorders. So it's sort of the perfect lab to bring my own expertise on FAPA, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later, and delve into even more deeply. And that also then opened up new avenues and new questions to study other tonsil disorders. While I was in Dan's lab, I realized I needed more knowledge of immunology because I was looking at the immunology of the tonsils. So Dan connected me to Dr. Pam Schwartzberg, who's now my mentor as an assistant clinical investigator in NIAID. So my mentors, Kathy, Dan, and Pam, have all been really instrumental in my career, and I'm just so grateful and lucky that I've been able to have these great mentors helping me. Mentorship has been shown in several studies to improve career trajectory in the mentees in terms of their career, in terms of paper output, grants that they receive, but it's also important in improving career satisfaction among mentees. And as we were writing this piece, I realized what a big role Kathy's played in that for me. So as I had mentioned, great mentorship has been essential in my career. So there are several aspects of my mentors that have really helped me. So the first is that they helped me figure out how to think like a scientist. We had been trained how to think like a clinician, but they really helped me think about a bigger picture and how to formulate research questions and how to systematically analyze those. Second, they are really important, were really important for helping me think about the big picture. I would come in with data, but they could really put it into a bigger context and think about what it means for the field, for the disease in our discussions. And that was really essential for me in thinking about how to share the results that I had, how to interpret the results that I had. All three of my mentors have been incredibly generous in providing the resources I needed for my research. And resources includes financial support for experiments, for education, and just that knowing that you have their support kind of opens your mind to thinking about new experiments or new areas to look at. Another area that is important for the mentor to provide resources is education, because starting a research career is like starting a little bit from scratch and learning how to think and analyze data or work in a lab. So I needed education, both formally from an MSCI, but also from their research teams. So from Kathy, I worked with her regulatory specialists. I worked with her research nurses. I learned how to get consent from patients. I learned how to keep track of data from a clinical research study. And those are all things I still use today. And she was very generous in letting me learn from her team, who were extremely experienced. My mentors have also been generous in providing opportunities. So if they heard about a conference going on, they would suggest for me to submit an abstract, or if there was an opportunity to present, they would suggest my name. So the generosity has been very flowing from them in so many different areas. And it's important to try to see if when for mentors to provide that, and for mentees to seek out mentors who have that spirit of generosity. My mentors have also been really important in helping me network and get connections within these fields, and also for the proper collaborators. When I started foraying into new areas that weren't quite within their lab's experience, they helped me find people who could help me really delve into those new research fields. And another important piece is promoting me in my field. So both Kathy and Dan have really let FAPA be my thing, my niche. So if they got emails from people about FAPA, or to give presentations, or to write a review about it, they turned those over to me. And that's been really important, because then I got to be known as a person who studies this disease and an expert in that area. I've also been so grateful for the career and personal advice from mainly from Kathy. And I was just thinking in the last few months, she's helped me figure out how to balance my career while being pregnant and having a child. She has helped me figure out how to hire a research nurse and what things to look for. I had 2 great candidates. I talked about it with her, and then I came in not sure what to do. And then as I talked to her about it, I knew who I wanted to hire. She helped me figure out how to manage a clinical coordinator who I wasn't sure was being thorough enough. She helped me figure out how to do that. So I've just been so grateful that she has been there to help me through those periods when I really I needed someone who was very experienced and who knew me to give me to help me get through those challenges. And lastly, my mentors have been really important role models. They're all different, but I kind of have been able to take interesting things that fit for me from each of them, and hope that I can model those behaviors when I'm a mentor as well. And as Kathy mentioned, she and I have been meeting every week for 9 years. That's 7 a.m. Central Time. Now I'm Eastern Time, so I get another hour to sleep at 8 a.m. For the past 9 years. So the first thing I wanted to talk more deeply about is how to select a mentor. So I think this is just such an important first step and can make your life so much better. So really take the time when you're selecting a mentor to think about these things. So the first thing is that the research area should be of interest to you. There are ups and downs in research, and sometimes there can be long periods of downs, and really having a disease or entity that strikes passion in you can really get you through those periods. The second, and perhaps the most important aspect, is to assess the mentor's track record. So I think it's important to ask the potential mentor if you can talk to their prior mentees or current mentees to find out more about their projects, and also to query them about how they are as a mentor. So I think there's 2 major areas that it's important to assess how the mentor is. So the first is their style. So the style can vary from person to person. Some people might want a certain type of mentor, and which may not work at all for someone else. So that there's not really a right or wrong in how to do this, but it's important to assess if the way the mentor operates works for you. And we've all worked with different attendings. Probably you might have had other research projects in the past too. So you may have an idea of what sort of works for you. So in terms of style, I think it's helpful to know if the mentor is very hands-on in terms of a mentee's day-to-day activities. So hands-on may be really helpful when you are going into an area where it's very new to you and you need more detailed help. But at an extreme, a very hands-on mentor can feel like they're micromanaging. So it's important to see if prior mentees, what their experience is. On the other hand, a mentor can be hands-off, which can be nice because you can feel more independent and sort of think about things be free to sort of pursue things that you think are important. But then at an extreme, a hands-off mentor can be sort of aloof and not there for you when you really need them. So knowing what style you think you need for your project based on what experiences you already have, and also what knowledge you think you need to do to pursue your project is really important. The second thing is, how responsive are they to the mentee? So I would encourage you to ask prior mentees, like, if they were able to get the resources they need for experiments or projects. Were they able to do get a master's degree if that was what they wanted to pursue? Were they able to get help from the mentor's research team, whether it's in the lab or whether it's getting IRB approval or designing a research study? And also, do they respond to your emails? How quickly do they review your manuscripts, as Kathy mentioned? Because waiting for weeks and weeks and having to like ask over and over and not getting responses to your emails can be really disheartening and can slow you down as well. So it's important to see how responsive the mentor is. And then lastly, I think it's good to know how the mentor handles disagreements, because often there are periods where you may want to go in a different direction than your mentor. And it's really important to be able to hear each other and think through what the best way forward is. But having a mentor who cannot really tolerate that disagreement can really be difficult. So I think finding out how a mentor handles that is very important. And again, how you handle that is also very important. And then the second area to think about, to really query prior mentees, is the commitment of the mentor. So as I had mentioned, the generosity in providing resources is critical, and also the generosity in promoting the mentee, not feeling threatened by a mentee going off and they're doing an area that's an offshoot of what the mentor is working on. Shouldn't feel threatening to the mentor. They should be generous in allowing the mentee to flourish in their own area. And also I would ask about the outcomes of their prior mentees. Did they go on to secure faculty positions? Did they get grants? Or whatever you're interested in, did the mentees accomplish that? And how did the mentor help them get there? So if you find that a mentor does not do those things, I think those are major red flags. I think in style, there could be differences in how people, what as a mentee you want, but in terms of the commitment to mentorship, I think if you are hearing from prior mentees that a mentor is not that committed, I would seriously consider that as a red flag and think about how would you manage that, or find another mentor to provide the things that you need to do to get your project done. And lastly, I think another thing that Kathy touched on is chemistry with the mentor. So as I had said, there can be challenging times in a research career, and having someone who sort of gives you that optimism, even when things aren't working out, makes such a big difference. And you can sort of gauge that after you talk to your mentor, even at the beginning. Like, do you feel some optimism, a sense of optimism or excitement about your project after you talk to them, or does it feel anxiety provoking that you may or may not succeed? I think it's really important to reflect on how you feel afterwards, because with a weekly meeting or the extent of a mentor-mentee relationship, you having a kind of a good feeling after you talk to them can make all the difference. And Kathy also touched on this. Do you feel heard? Is a mentor sort of listening to you? Do you feel that you could ask for things from them? Because a mentor is not always going to know what you need. So you do have to feel comfortable saying, this is what I need. And it's important to have a mentor who you feel you can say that, you can ask for those things and feel heard. And so next I wanted to talk about, for us, it was a weekly meeting. A regular meeting is very, very important. And as Kathy said, this is sort of the anchor to our mentoring relationship. And after I met Kathy, I instituted that with all my next mentors also. I knew this meeting was really important to her because she almost never canceled it unless she was like flying somewhere. So I knew that this was important and I needed to be ready. And I knew her time was also valuable. So I tried not to cancel, even if I didn't have that much to discuss and we had just talked for 10, 15 minutes. Like I said, from the chemistry of the mentor, it was kind of a boost for the week. Like, okay, I can do it. I can, keep going with my project. And so I think it's nice to have that, that valuable time with your mentor. Even if you don't have that much new data to discuss, you could just talk about what you have been doing in the past week or two. As Kathy said, it's really important to make an agenda. Initially, I was sending it to her and my other mentors beforehand so that they knew what I was going to talk about and so they could also be prepared. And I think one of the most critical pieces for this meeting is to take the time to prepare for it. So that means having not just saying what your data is, but having the graphs prepared, maybe even making a PowerPoint presentation so that you can clearly share what it is that you found in a little more of in a more refined way so that your mentor can also understand it and provide you the feedback that you need. Also, as Kathy said, be ready with the manuscripts or abstracts that you want reviewed. Sometimes I would just bring them in. Usually I would just send it to Kathy beforehand. And she, of course, very quickly reviewed them. So then I could just ask her questions where I was unsure how to change things or get her to review something again. Also, take the time to make specific questions about where you want your research to go and directly ask for the resources that you need, because sometimes I think people can get frustrated that my mentor is not providing this or that, but sometimes you just have to directly ask that I need help doing XYZ, or I think this experiment's really important. And so this is how much it will cost. And I would like to get this, and this is why. And I think being able to directly ask that can go a long way. And then as the relationship goes along, asking for career guidance. And as I said, I think it's really important to be very prepared for these meetings and to take the time to think about how you interpret your data and want to proceed with your project. I sort of think of it as being ready with your assessment and plan. Like, you don't want to just go over the history and physical and not have taken the time to formulate an assessment and plan. Like, this is a time to really think about it and then be challenged by your mentor and by other members of the research team. But that's how you sort of develop your scientific thinking process. And it will make the meeting a lot more enjoyable for both of you. And of course, with time, the relationship changes. So the weekly meeting was sort of the anchor, how we got started. As the relationship changes, I think it's important to think about what your own niche will be. You don't want exact overlap with your mentor, because then that sort of puts you in competition. So begin from the beginning, as Kathy was saying, when you're designing when you're selecting your topic, how that you will make that into your own. And if you have a open relationship with your mentor and you've done you looked at their track record, you know that there's someone who has that generosity, this will be a discussion that they will also welcome, because it also helps them go into new areas and helps them develop you as your own scientist. Another aspect is to be open to feedback. There have been many times when I didn't know, there was a gap in my knowledge, and my mentor exposed me to that, or there was an alternate explanation for the data that I didn't think about, or I did something wrong in the experiment. I didn't know that I was supposed to add some reagent, or because I wasn't experienced with a certain technique, or that my writing was unclear. I think it's important to not take it personally or to think of it as a sign of incompetence as a researcher. It's just how we all learn, and to sort of take it as a way to improve our skills as a researcher. And then lastly, I think it's really helpful to observe your mentor. And I didn't realize I was doing this, but I think it's just seeing how they manage their time, their team, and the challenges that come about is really important. Because I was with Kathy for 2 years, I saw how she managed her team. I saw that if they needed someone to draw blood, she would go and do it. If they needed consent, she would do it. There was nothing that was too trivial or that was someone else's job to do. That if it was needed to do, she would be there doing it. And so I really saw that how that endeared her to her team and really made her team want to do well also. And I really admired her work ethic as well. And she actually let me stay at her house when I was looking for a place to live in Nashville. So then I also got to see how she managed her personal and professional life. And now that I'm in new stages of my life, I sort of think back to how she did that. And now with our relationship I can continue to ask her about how to manage to balance work and life. So I just wanted to also take a little bit of time to talk about the ups and downs of research, because I think this is where people can sort of decide that they don't want to pursue a career in research. And I was just very fortunate to have mentors who pushed me along when the downs came. So there's these peaks and valleys in research, and the valleys can be very long and very deep, and that's normal. So when I started at NIH, I initially I'd collected a lot of DNA samples from families at Vanderbilt and took them with me to NIH to further study. And for the first about 3 years, we did whole exome sequencing on those samples. We did copy number. I looked for copy number variations. These are all things that I didn't know how to do, but had to learn how to do, and found nothing. So it was kind of demoralizing. And so talking to Kathy every week really helped me to get through those periods. And I think it's important to know that obstacles are to be expected in science and in research. But when you hit those peaks, it's awesome. I still remember when the day that we identified genetic risk loci for FAPA, that really just made sense. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. It was so exciting. I just ran up to tell Dan about it. I called Kathy to tell her about it because it really was, after like years of searching for something, it was just great to be able to find that. The second thing that I want to mention is that it takes time to learn research skills. So when I first joined Dan's lab, I found that I knew almost nothing about how to operate in a biology lab. Like, I didn't quite remember how to pipette properly or design experiments. I didn't know how to extract DNA or peripheral blood cells, or to do immunologic stimulation assays or genotype patients. I didn't know much of anything. So that was also kind of demoralizing, because you had done all this training to be a clinician, and then all of a sudden I'm in this situation where I feel pretty incompetent, and everybody else looks like they know what they're doing. So it took, like I said, took 5 years of being in his lab to gain the proficiency to do bench research in human immunology and genetics. And I'm learning new techniques all the time. So you're often in a position of not knowing exactly what to do. But I think it's important to remember that, even when we were training to be physicians, it took us a really long time to gain the competence to be a great physician. And we got feedback from a lot of people, including our patients, nurses, attendings, even students, and all of that helped us be who we are. And it's the same for being a researcher, that we sort of go back to that position to learn these skills again. And I think another important aspect that I think Kathy helped me to hold on to was to really capitalize on our strengths as clinicians. So I just wanted to use this as an example, my own project. So when I was at Vanderbilt, Kathy, as I said, had encouraged me to study the genetics of this syndrome. So we started collecting DNA samples from families. But I found, as I was looking at the family histories, that there were just a lot of people with recurrent pharyngitis that didn't quite sound like FAPA, and recurrent aphthous ulcers, which is one of the cardinal features that children have during the flares. So I sort of stepped back and we did a case control study looking at the family histories of patients with FAPA and those of controls. So that in that we found that both recurrent pharyngitis and recurrent aphthous ulcers, were enriched among first-degree relatives of patients with FAPA. So I had this idea from this study that recurrent aphthous ulcers and FAPA were related entities. So once I came to the NIH, initially, actually, others were looking at some familial cases of FAPA, but I found that they had incorrectly put affected and unaffected in some of the patients, because they didn't realize that people with very frequent recurrent pharyngitis may be considered to have some reduced penetrance phenotype of FAPA, or they didn't delve, because some of them didn't have patient contact at all. They didn't quite realize that patients with FAPA may not, they didn't take a deep enough history to know that a patient had FAPA. But then it allowed me to really find a connection that sort of finally began to crack open the genetics of FAPA. So after I joined Dan's lab, his lab looked at the genetic risk loci for Behçet's disease, which is a complex genetic disease. So they found many common genetic variants that were risk factors for Behçet's disease. And then shortly thereafter, a large GWAS study for recurrent aphthous ulcers came out, and that showed that many of the same risk loci that his lab found for Behçet's disease were also risk loci for aphthous ulcers. And because of the study that I had done when I was working with Kathy, I thought, oh, if those two are related, probably FAPA is related as well, because FAPA patients have recurrent aphthous ulcers, and there's a high prevalence of recurrent aphthous ulcers among patients with FAPA. So we decided to query a cohort of about 200 patients, actually 3 different cohorts of patients with FAPA for the risk genes that were in common to recurrent aphthous ulcers and recurrent aphthous ulcers and Behçet's disease. And lo and behold, we found that those risk loci were also risk loci for FAPA with quite high odds ratios for a complex genetic disease. So this relationship between Behçet's disease, recurrent aphthous ulcers, and FAPA in terms of a common genetic risk loci, we proposed to put them on a common spectrum. And I think this is another example of how mentorship, once I got the data through discussions with Dan, really helped me think about the big picture and what it means. And so we proposed putting these 3 diseases on a spectrum called Behçet spectrum disorders. And we frequently see patients with sort of gray areas between these diseases, like patients with FAPA, but they get genital ulcers. So it sort of made sense in terms, because we had seen patients who sort of fall on the spectrum and not in discrete diseases. but I think this shows the importance of being a clinician and assessing the family histories of these patients and finding these relationships. And so I think it's important, even if it takes us some time to get the research skills, we do have this really rich skill set, and we should really remember that and use that to our advantage. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention is to be open to unexpected opportunities. Maybe when Kathy sent me to talk to Dan at NIH, she had an inkling that I would go there, but I didn't. But when I talked to them, I knew that I felt like this isn't what I was exactly expecting to do after fellowship, but this is an interesting, different opportunity. And so I'll take it. And then same in research, when you are kind of on to something that is interesting, I think it's important to look into those doors that open that may not be in exactly the areas that you're thinking, but may guide you to different things. Like, since FAPA is a disorder of the tonsils, I've now begun studying obstructive sleep apnea as well, because we started finding interesting immunologic features of sleep apnea tonsils. So just having that openness, I think, is really important. So with that, I think Kathy and I can take questions. I think there's a few minutes left that we could answer any questions. I just wanted to say again how lucky I am to have Kathy as my mentor all of these 9 years. And I hope that in the future, when I'm a mentor, that I can emulate a lot of these things that she does so beautifully.
Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful relationship. I think that I've gotten more than I've given. So are there any questions that people have, or any comments that you would like to add? Or I think both Kalpana and I would be more than happy to answer any emails that you might have about questions as well, if you'd prefer to do that.
Folks on the call can feel free to unmute and ask a question, or if you put it in the chat, I'm monitoring the chat and I can ask the question for you. While people are thinking, I'd love to ask you all a question. I'm really just blown away and impressed by your weekly meeting schedule. And I think about that in the context of a lab that might often have a weekly lab meeting. But I wonder for mentor-mentee relationships, maybe where there's a project that doesn't involve experiments in the lab, maybe it's a clinical research project. Do you still think, what do you think is the right frequency for meeting? Do you think that weekly is what we really ought to strive for, and what the fellows ought to strive for with their mentors? Or is there with other types of research, would you modify that at all?
Well, I'll start, and then Kalpana has had several different experiences, so she can comment. I think it's really important to have a weekly meeting. I think it's a time that we always started early, so it was before rounds, and it was something that we did. I think during the time since COVID, it's been a source of a lot of excitement and strength, and Kalpana is doing some COVID studies. I just think that it's, and I do it with all of my mentees. I think it's something that works well, and it really allows them their personal attention and to see. So I think that not all mentors do that. I think some mentors meet every 2 weeks. And there's just a lot of different ways that you can do it. But for me, this was really important. I'm excited about it. I can't wait till 7 o'clock, because, I know that I'm going to hear some new things. I'm going to hear some new ideas that I don't have. And it's become even, certainly it's to hear the new genetic findings that Kalpana has now are really fun. And we don't always talk about science. We may talk about patients, or we may talk about the world, or we may talk about you know, how frustrated we are that people don't seem to be respecting science. So it's just been something that I just do with all my mentors, and that just works for me. And obviously I can't make suggestions for others, but Kalpana's had other mentors too and had lab meetings, and so she may want to comment as well.
So I think I also think weekly is very helpful. I think monthly is too much. By every 2 weeks is probably okay. When I joined Dan's lab, I have every 2 week meetings with him, and that's in addition to lab meeting. And I think that was really important because that gave me the time to establish a real one-on-one relationship with him, and also lab meetings not really the best time to ask for like exact resources or collaborators, or if I needed some help from his clinical team to do things. Like I felt like I could do that more openly with him on a one-on-one basis. And I think many of his mentees do the same thing, like in that they have one-on-one meetings with him. And it also gives you a chance to kind of go through abstracts. He's a very good writer, so it was very helpful to be in those meetings with him, and he could sort of go through some of my writing as well at that time. So I really, even if there is a lab meeting, I think it's important to also ask for a one-on-one meeting. Even if the mentor does not bring it up, you can ask for it. And I think that's also a sign of if the mentor's commitment to you, if they're willing to offer that time. Yeah, I think at least every 2 weeks is very helpful. Beyond that, sometimes you can, if a meeting gets canceled, then you're going 2 months, sometimes even 3 months without seeing each other one-to-one. So every 2 weeks kind of gives you some leeway if there's some travel for either of you, that if a meeting gets missed, then you still are at least meeting every month or so.
Thank you. Are there any other questions out there from the attendees?
Or any comments of if you have other reflections of what makes a good mentor-mentee relationship, we'd love to hear also other experiences.
I had the privilege of having Kathy Edwards as my mentor, and I see Annabelle and Kathleen, who are both fellows at the same time. And so we're all part of an academic family. And that's the one thing that's great is when someone's your mentor, they're your mentor for life, and keep in touch. And I see James Wood there too. So nice little, so.
I was just gonna say as well that I think as a branch off of Kathy's tree, Buddy Creech and Isaac Thompson have been my mentors. And one of the advice that Kathy gave me as I was leaving was to actually make sure I keep those weekly meetings. And so I do that with Isaac, and that's actually been extremely helpful for me. Even as you said, even just to keep, I think, research momentum and momentum in general going, even if there's not specific questions, I leave those meetings with a sense of optimism, even though we didn't talk about maybe anything too scientific. It kind of just re-energizes me to keep going. And so I would just echo that. I think that those meetings go way beyond just the science and more just kind of keeping momentum with projects that otherwise seem mundane at times.
Pediatric infectious disease is really a family. You know, we really are a group of people that enjoy each other and think about each other and you know, talk about interesting questions. So I think that it's a natural to continue those same relationships. Thanks so much, Jim.
I was just going to add to what Natasha was saying, you know, as somebody who benefited from another child of Kathy's, Natasha, I think one of the things for me, although my focus right now really isn't on research, it's been just so helpful to have people to ask career advice questions, to connect and network. And I think that's one reason it really helps to pick people who, as mentors, who are interested in your own well-being, not just from, somebody who pursues their same path, but somebody who wants you to be successful in the unique way that you might be successful. So I feel like I've benefited both from Natasha and Kathy doing that. So I think that's another thing. I think you touched really well upon, Kalpana, about making sure that, even if you aren't going to be this person's carbon copy, which I don't think anybody would want you to be, but that you want this person to support you to be successful no matter what.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Kathy and Kalpana, for taking time out to come speak to at Fellows Day. And we really appreciated your words and your experience. And again, I just encourage everyone to take a look at their article to kind of follow up and reinforce some of the things they talked about today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah.
We're going to